Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome along to Data Platform Downunder. Once again, my name is Warwick Rudd. With my co-host Martin Catherall, we're hosting you the Data Platform Downunder virtual sessions through Meetup. For today's session, we're joined by Taiob Ali talking to us about Azure SQL Database. Where is my SQL agent? This session is being recorded and will be made available on our YouTube channel probably in the next day or so, that you can come back and watch this at any point in time. Throughout the session, if you do have any questions, put them in the chat window or raise your hand and we'll be able to ask those questions to Taiob for you. Other than that, sit back, relax, and enjoy today's session.
Thank you, Warwick. So I can start sharing, or you have anything else on the slide? No.
No.
Okay, great. Just let me know when you can see it.
We can see your first slide, yes.
Okay, great. So Warwick already mentioned the title, and I want to thank Warwick and the other co-host for setting up this meetup group. As all of you know, PASS ceased its operation, and it is good to see that leaders around the world are stepping up and setting this up, giving up their own time and resource. These are all volunteer work, so I hope you appreciate that. Also, I appreciate the opportunity of inviting me and speaking to your to the group. So let's move on. I'm not going to read the thing that's on the right side. If you want to read about me, you can do it. I just want you to take a note of the stuff on the left side. Pretty much, if you remember the words SQL worldwide, you will find me. So if you have any question that in case if you didn't get a chance to ask me during this session, you can always contact me later on. You can use any of these four methods: email, tweet, contact page from my blog website, and also in LinkedIn. And I will respond. I can guarantee that. Sometime it might take a while, but otherwise I'll do that. So that's pretty much I want you to take note from this slide. Now, why should you listen to this talk, or why I'm giving this talk? So I just want to give you a little bit of background. I do work for a company as a full-time employee, and I'm working here for a little over 4 years. We do have a small office actually in Australia, in Sydney, but our head office is in Boston, in East Coast US. And one of the reasons I was hired is to help them move some of their resources to cloud. And after doing a bunch of research, not me, just as a whole bigger team, we decided Azure will be our primary cloud provider. But if we need a service from other cloud providers that will help in our business, we are not opposed to that, right? But primarily, our first choice will be Azure from Microsoft, because we are a Microsoft shop. And then we were primarily a SQL Server shop, huge SQL servers, because it's a financial investment management firm. So we do a lot of looking at old trends, looking at old data, how market reacted on during different events around the world. That's how analysts go and run their models. They try to predict what they're going to buy and sell. And part of that process, we also decided to move some of our SQL Server data to cloud. Now, in what format, right? And we decided not to do a lift and shift. So we looked at a couple of different options. I was chatting someone, before we started, they're also looking at Azure SQL Database. I think Francisco said also looking at Data Factory. So we looked at a couple, all these options, and we actually broke a couple of SQL Server databases into pieces. Some of those things we took as a flat file, using other processes in cloud to process a lot faster than what we were doing before. Because we buy a lot of data from third parties, right, overnight, and we process those, stage those for the analysts to look at in the morning. And part of that process, we also decided to move some of this stuff into Azure SQL Database. And when I say Azure SQL database, I just want to make it clear. So when you talk about Azure SQL, there are a bunch of things in that family, right? We have managed instance, we have Azure SQL on VM, we have SQL Server on Azure VM, we have Azure SQL database, and then also when you have Azure Synapse workspace, you also get uh, you know some kind of data store, right? And there are serverless and there are dedicated pool, and behind those, there are some SQL Server engine also works behind the scene. But this talk is exclusively if you choose a PaaS option, and PaaS is platform as a service. There's one option is called Azure SQL Database. And they also sit within Azure SQL Server, but that Azure SQL Server is really not what we are used to in on-premise SQL Server. It's just a shell. It keeps track of what databases you have, and you can still have some logins and a couple of DMBs to look at a couple of things. But each database is really independent. You cannot even natively do a cross join, and there are some other restrictions. So when we started moving some of this stuff into Azure SQL database, some of our data or some of our full database move into to Azure SQL database, then the question came around, how do we do some of this stuff that you are seeing in this slide? And this is not exclusive list. I just picked few examples because some of this is stuff you still have to do. And people might have a strong opinion, like index maintenance. If you look online, there are some renowned MVPs even have very strong opinion if people should be doing index maintenance or no. And I'm not going to get there. It's your choice. But these are just an example. So, like time series data, like you want to purge old data, right? You want to collect some DMV information for your baseline and then trending and monitoring and alerting also. Long running queries, blocking. These are common tasks. We still have to do those. How do you do those? Because there is no SQL Server agent. And when we are looking at that, after about a year and a half, the managed instance went into GA. And I knew this question will come. People will say, then why bother about all this, Azure SQL without an agent? Why don't I go to managed instance? And I had the same question. And I was wondering, why people would use this Azure SQL database going forward. Now we have managed instance. And I looked at the pricing tier, and that kind of answered my question. And Microsoft knew that. So today, if you look at the pricing tier, I would say pretty much double to use a managed instance compared to Azure SQL database. So, that was one of the reason that I had to sort some of this out, because I cannot just go and tell my boss, we should pay double. I don't want to do all this work, or we don't want to sort this out because they have a built-in SQL Server agent. Now, before I move from this slide, some of you might be wondering why backup is not here, right? Because in an on-premise SQL Server, taking database backup is probably one of the prime use of SQL Server agent, right, as a job. In Azure SQL database, you do not have to take your backup. Microsoft takes care of it. You can have between 7 to 35 days, depending on your tier, point in time backup, or you can pay more and have it up to 35 days. And you can also have long-term retention up to 10 years. I'm not going to go into details, but you can look it up. Or if you want to know more, just let me know. I can provide you some resource. We are a small group, so I'm not watching the chat. I have two screens for different use. Please put it there, and Warwick will stop me anytime because we are a small group. So no harm. We can stop, discuss if you have questions. We don't have to be so strict with the flow. So this slide I put because, including myself and the people that I talk to, most people today are in a hybrid situation. And what I mean by that, they still have a bunch of resources in their on-premise database data centers, and they're probably slowly chipping resources from here and moving to cloud. Very few people that I meet, they are 100% in cloud today. So some of this stuff I'll show you, that if you still have resources on premise, if you still have SQL Server, Windows host, you can still take advantage of some of this and do the maintenance against your Azure SQL database in cloud. And I'll show some of this stuff. And if you do not have it, I'll also show you some solutions that are total in cloud. So if someone say, We got rid of our data center 100%. We do not have anything. I'm 100% in the cloud in Azure. I'll also show you a couple of options how you can manage or maintain your Azure SQL databases totally using the resources in the cloud. So this is also, I just listed some of this stuff that what's your option. So if you still have stuff on premise, you can use linked server, which you are used to, but this can get cumbersome. I'll talk about later on. If you have hundreds of Azure SQL database, maybe not a practical solution. You can have PowerShell scripts to do your maintenance, and you can use the Windows scheduler to schedule some of this stuff, right? Because we are used to scheduling stuff through SQL Server agent. A Windows scheduler can do the same. Or you can do third-party scheduler. Like at my workplace, I use a product called Tidal. So you can schedule anything. You can schedule T-SQL scripts, PowerShell scripts, and in Tidal, you can point to Azure SQL database. It does allow that. If you say I do not have anything on premise, in Azure, IaaS means infrastructure as a service. What some people did, you spin up a VM, a Windows VM, or nowadays you can do it in Linux too, and install a SQL Server, and you can use that agent to maintain some of your stuff in Azure SQL database. But that go back to what I said on the first, first block, that you still will need a linked server because that's a full-blown SQL server. You have agent, but you will have link server to connect to those Azure SQL databases. You can do the same over there with PowerShell and with Windows Scheduler. Now, if you say that I do not have anything else, I'm fully in PaaS, then we'll be talking about other services that Microsoft Azure provides. And these services are independent from your Azure SQL database. So Azure Automation is a service by itself. Azure Function, Elastic Job Agents, and I'll demo the first three. I'm not going to demo web jobs. I personally have an opinion that web jobs is probably not the ideal fit for some of the maintenance tasks that we do as a database professional. But I have seen people using web jobs um, um, because the language is very restricted using web jobs. So if you're proficient in C#, which I'm not, uh, I wrote some C# code many years ago, but I don't use it anymore. You can use web jobs and get by with some of this stuff doing via web jobs, because web jobs as of now only support C#, whereas Azure Function and Azure Automation, you can do other languages, like PowerShell is one that's my favorite. So this is just another picture what I talked about link server. We are used to link server right today in your on-premises SQL Server. You can have link server to other third-party databases, to other SQL servers. You can do the same, and I'll show you how to create one. And you can point to your Azure SQL database. And once you have a link server established, you can do pretty much anything that you do today natively in your on your on-premises SQL Server. The next one we talked about, you can use PowerShell and a Windows task scheduler and schedule your maintenance tasks using that process. This is the next one I'm going to talk about is the Azure Automation, and this is a broad. The Azure Automation itself can be a talk for over an hour. This is a very big service that Microsoft provide. The heart of Azure Automation is you use runbooks to do your tasks. And runbooks can be written in PowerShell, and you can just have totally PowerShell code, or you can also, there's a graphical runbook that you can write. If I have to give an example, like, when you build SSIS in Visual Studio, you can, drag and drop different tasks, and you can connect those with arrows, and you can modify code. You can do something like that. And you can also have Python notebooks. So if you are proficient in Python, if you want to maintain your SQL Server, Azure SQL databases with Python, you can do that too with runbook. And there are different kind of runbooks. I'm not going to go into details. But if you look at this picture, I actually took the bottom half I cropped it and put it here because the bottom half is about using Azure Automation and using Runbook. You can also maintain your resources on premise, doing it from the cloud. You'll need some plugins, but I left it alone because we are talking primarily about Azure SQL database. So if you look at this picture on the left, from Azure Portal, from Webhook, from PowerShell, from Azure Monitor, Azure Alert, you can send a webhook and you can call a runbook, right? So the idea is if you're sending your logs and metrics, say like to Log Analytics workspace, right? You are monitoring your usage, and at certain point you see that your storage or your CPU usage reached to a certain threshold that you want to scale up. Now you're not going to sit there 24/7 to watch and to decide when to scale up, right? So what you can do, you can have an alert that will have an action, and the action group will have a webhook, and that's going to call a runbook, and the runbook in a PowerShell, and you can say go and upscale my Azure SQL database to the next tier, right? Scale up. Or if you want to do update stats based on some criteria, you can continuously keep monitoring it as frequently as you want. When you say like, I don't know, say like my modification counter of my number of rows exceeded certain threshold and I want to update stats with this percent of sample or fully scan, fully, with a full scan, whatnot, you can trigger a runbook and the runbook will run and do your jobs, whatever you want to do. One caution with the runbook is that you cannot, you lose the precise control when you are using runbook. And what I mean by that, today on premises, when you are using a SQL Server agent job, I can schedule it up to the second, right? So hour, minute, and second. With runbook, you can schedule it, but then once it gets triggered, it goes into a queue and then it grabs the compute resource and then start running it. So you lose that precise time of triggering something. Uh, this can get delayed by few seconds. So just keep that in mind. If you have a precise requirement, you want to be careful with this. This is a small video of about 15 minutes. If you do not know about Azure Friday, please Google this. Every Friday, the Azure team from different teams they release a video between 10 to 15 minutes. If you're really new to a concept, I like these videos. They're pretty short. They normally come up with a demo. So you'll have a pretty good starting point and a better idea what this service is about, what it does. Is it going to solve your problem or no, or is that something you should spend more time and try to evaluate? So this is a video you might look up about Azure Automation. So the next is Azure Function. And for me, after looking at many things, and I'll show you one more thing, and then we'll go to demo. I actually at the end decided to use Azure Function totally for maintaining, collecting information. So you can say pretty much monitoring, alerting, baselining, growth trend, whatever. I do pretty much through Azure Function now. Initially, I was not very excited about Azure Function, uh, um, but because PowerShell was not a supported language when it came, generally available. But later on, I think in end of 2019, PowerShell was added, and that and there are other restrictions, right? Like today, even today, if you look at the hosting plan, there are three different kind of hosting plan. If you're on the consumption plan, your function maximum runtime is a 10-minute. So you want to be careful. So I'm not going to read these points that I wrote on the right side, but I want you to be aware to explore some of this into more details and then see if it matches with your need, right? And there are premium and app service you can use. Those have unlimited runtime, just to give you an example. But Azure Function today supports C Sharp, F Sharp, Java, JavaScript, PowerShell, Python. Recently, they added TypeScript. But historically, in my current workplace, we were using PowerShell even to maintain our on-premises SQL servers. So that was a good thing for us. We could easily, take this code and reuse those. Other good thing is with Azure Function, because this is a app service, so the security is pretty good. You can have a app registration, then you get a account that you do not need to know password. Nobody knows the password, right? So you can take that and you can give that proper permission to all of your Azure SQL database. So all your functions will run under that account. So you do not have to have a change password. You do not have to worry about the password. It becomes the Azure AD object, but nobody really needs to know the password. You can grab the token and use it for authentication. And of course, you have to, after authentication, you have to give it proper privilege to do whatever you want to do through your Azure function. If it's just a read, it has to have read permission. If you're modifying, it has to have the proper permission. Um, VS Code. Some of you, if you do not know, this is another tool that's multi-platform. It's a extension base. So the tool come as a base, and then you can add extension based on what you need. They do have a dedicated extension just for Azure Function. So once you enable that extension in your Visual Studio Code, you can connect to your subscription. You can really write your functions there. You can test it and you can push it to production, all staying within the Visual Studio Code. So if you're interested, go into the Microsoft documentation. They also have a couple of videos with demos how to do that. Other advantage of this is once you mention your dependencies, say like you need this PowerShell modules or this or that, it will maintain by itself. So it will download. If there is a newer version, automatically will grab it for you. Do not have to maintain it. But if you want to restrict the versions that I do not want to go beyond that version, you can also do that from your configuration. These are two URLs that I put. One is a try function, of course it says, and if you want to do a quick start, these two URLs will help you with that. Any question, Warwick, at this point? I can minimize and maybe see.
Not at this point, Taiob.
Okay, great. So I'll move on. Folks, again, if you have questions, please put in the chat or raise your hand, and we can stop and definitely talk about those. So the last one is Elastic Jobs. If you want to have a look and feel of what we are used to today in on-premise with MSDB, this is the closest thing you can get in Azure SQL database. One caution, since 2018, this is still in preview. Some of the documentation I saw got updated even in 2021. So it's totally not that Microsoft forgot about this or they are not working on this. But it's still in preview. So if a feature is in preview for 3 years, I do not have an inside scope, but I don't know where it's heading to. But it's usable and it's pretty useful in for some of the scenarios. So I'll talk about this. At the heart of this is you have a job agent, which is a service, and you will need Azure SQL database to hold your metadata. And you can write the outputs to the same database, or you can have a different database for your job outputs. And then you have targets. And I'll talk about that a little bit more. So here are the four main components. Job agent, I'm very loosely speaking, is what we know as the MSDB today. It's going to have your jobs, job definitions, schedules, history, runtime details, error messages, and all that. And job database will have all those. Job agent is an orchestrator. It's going to, put all these four things glued together. Target group can be many different permutation and combination. I'll show you some of the pictures. Now, this is on the left side, you see how the security works. So you definitely have to have a credential that will run your jobs and which will need to have access to your targets, right? So it can go and do the stuff that you want it to do. Uh, these are some of your targets, right? So where you can run your job, or against what kind of resources. It can be a bunch of individual databases, doesn't matter, different subscriptions, different region. It can be a whole server or bunch of servers. And once you just put the server name, it will go and find all the databases and run that job against every database separately. Elastic Pool is something in Azure that we use. You can buy a fixed amount of resource or a compute, and you can share it between bunch of Azure SQL databases. So you can also make your target a Elastic Pool. But if you see this example 3, you see a red cross, right? X sign. So the difference between example 2 and example 3 is, in example 3, we said, put the whole Azure SQL Server. But in example 3, I can say, okay, my target is this Azure SQL Server, means all the databases within that server, but I want to exclude DB2. You can do that. So I'm not going to read through all this, but I put the URL. You can go and take a look. Pretty much you can do, any kind of, target group that you need. These are some pictures that I took. So as soon as you turn on this service and point or assign a Azure SQL database as your job database, all these system objects get created. And if you look at those names, right, SP start job, SP stop job, job is steps. So some of these are familiar to us, right? We see these things in MSDB. So I think, it's pretty much same code base. They reused it. And so you get all this. Now, one thing is, this is as of today, you can only use T-SQL as your job steps. So you cannot run any other thing. You cannot have PowerShell code scheduled through this. So just keep that in mind. So if you're PowerShell heavy, you might not like this, but if all your jobs is still using T-SQL, this can be a good solution. Based on your state, how big or how small, these are a couple of things I want you to remember. So, it can run up to 100, and sometime it will limit parallel. You can limit your parallel job execution, how many you want to run in parallel. Now the compute will come from your job database, just to keep that in mind. It's not going to, grab more compute from some other place like Azure Function does, right? It's not a serverless service. So if you have bunch of things running, your job database have to, have a higher SQ. Microsoft recommend at least a S1 as a minimum. It's a recommendation, but even if you put it in as zero, it's going to work, but it's not recommended. Your job history get purged automatically 45 days. If you do not want to keep 45 days, you want to keep the database size small, there is a store procedure you can run with number of days, and it will delete those for you. So I'm done with the slides. I'll go to the demo, and then we'll come back and wrap it up. For demo, I just want to make sure that, I show you what I'm using. So I have a typo here. Actually, I'm not using actually, no, I'm using on-premise SQL Server, just to show you that I can still bring the data from Azure SQL and save it in a local database server, but I'm also using Azure SQL database. I should have probably mentioned that. So let me bring my Azure Data Studio. Azure Data Studio now, it's also a new tool, multi-platform. You can run your T-SQL scripts, PowerShell. You can also do something called Notebook. And I know Warwick has probably a 15 part blog post on this, very detailed. If you're interested, go and look at it. Notebooks, what it can do. Couple of, I think, talks about extensions and all that. I read a couple of those. I was looking at notebook jobs the other day, and I attended one of Warwick's talked about notebook jobs. So there is an extension called SQL Agent with that. So anyway, so take a look. So notebook is you have a kernel, so there's different kind ones you can do. And the good part is you can have your comments, you can have pictures, you can have your code, and then you can also run it, save the output, and send it to someone if you need to. So as you can see that this is a setup demo. So I ran most of this stuff because, as I said in my comment, it takes about 40 to 50 minutes to set all the things up that I'm going to show you. So I'm not going to run this, but I'll show you what are the resources that I set up with this code. I'll show you in the portal. And I put enough comments. So if you download this from my GitHub repo, changing some of the variables like my subscription ID, I didn't put my password. You just have to probably change your local instance name. You should be very easily able to follow this code. So I'm going to skip this, and it says demo starts here, right? So the first one, I have another notebook, and this one, as you can see here, I'm connected to my SQL Server that's running in my laptop that I'm giving the presentation from, right? And I talked about if you have an on-premises SQL Server, you can create a link server pointing to your Azure SQL database, and you can do maintenance. So here I'll be running very simple scripts, but don't get hung up on that. You can replace my script with anything you want, right? So any complex task you want to do, just take that off and put yours, and it will do it. So the first what we are doing is this is on-premise SQL Server. We are connecting using master database. I'm just creating a table for staging. So I will be collecting the database sizes from all the Azure SQL database that I created, and I'll save it to on-premise. So before I go there, let me show you. So running that script, and I did a couple of things in the portal. All these resources got created for the demo purpose. And I put everything under a resource group called SQL Agent Demo. A resource group is a logical container. The good part is, as you can see, I get about $130, and this is my personal account. I don't mix it up with my work. So once I'm done with this demo, I can just go and delete this resource group. It is going to delete all these resources. So I do not have to delete this one by one. I created two SQL Server, and I also created a bunch of databases within this. And I call this a demo job server. Within this, I created the job database, which I haven't, I didn't create the service yet. I'll show you. And I also created a DBA warehouse to save the output. That's when I demo the Elastic Job Agent, I'll show you. I also created another server called Target Server, and I created a Elastic pool and bunch of test databases just to do the demo. So let's run this. So this is a simple one. I'm creating a database and creating a table just to save some of this information. Shouldn't take that long. Okay. Okay, it's done. So next, if you see here, my server name, and this is an Azure SQL Server, and this database is in this server. So I'm creating a linked server pointing to that. And now I'm calling this, I'm saying insert into my local database into this table, but using open query. I'm doing this select using this link server against the Azure SQL database. So here it's pretty simple. I'm just bringing the database size, but as I said, you can replace this piece of code with anything you want, right? Any maintenance or whatever you need to do. So let's see what happened. As you can see, so this is a UTC or GMT time, so it's probably you can match with your time. We went to this Azure SQL Server, we went to this database and collected this now. Now this is all well and good, right? Now, if you say that I want to still use the link server, I want to use my local server, but I do not want to bring this data to on-premise, I want to save it in cloud, right? We can do that too. So this time I'm going to disconnect and I'm going to connect to a Azure SQL Server. And one thing, if you do not know, we cannot use use statement against Azure SQL database. So you have to make sure that you are in the right database context, right? And what I mean by that, no, I lost it. So as you can see here, this is my server name. I'm connected to AdventureWorks database, right? So I'm creating the same table that I created on premise. Now I'm creating it into that Azure SQL database. And now I can run the same statement, but this time I'm actually inserting into using that link server, database name, schema, and the table, right? So I'm saying collect this, but save it into the Azure SQL database, reference to database and server database are supported in this. Okay, I know what happened. I need to point back to my local instance. And now I ran the same thing, but I saved the information into that database in Azure. As you can see, I'm connecting there. And if we run this, you can see that. Now this is all well and good, right? Because I'm just playing with one Azure SQL database. How about if someone has 100 of this, right? What they're going to do? They're not going to run this one by one. So the next iteration, this is a PowerShell. Again, exactly the same code. And I'm wrapping this. So with Azure, this is a little bit of sidetrack information. So the way the hierarchy works, you have a management group, then you have subscriptions, you have resource group, then you have your resources. So I can go up to the management group or I can go to the root management, and under that I can have multiple management groups. So I can go and iterate through each one and say find all the Azure SQL database and collect the same information from all, right? So in my case, of course, I'm using just one subscription and one resource group, but as you saw, I have two Azure SQL Server and bunch of Azure SQL databases, right? So I'm going to run this code once and I'll say that, go and collect this information from all those databases. Do the same thing, but don't do this one by one. I want to do this all in one go. And once I run this, you will see in the output, it is now actually going and collecting this from all these databases, right? And just to make sure that it was collected, we can run this, or we can go and go to the other window and run some T-SQL. As you can see, before we only had 3 rows, and now all this got collected just now by running this. So that's also well and good. But the question now, I have to do this maintenance, whatever I'm going to do, or collect this data every X number of hours, right? do I expect someone to sit there and babysit this 24/7? That's also not, sorry, that's also not practical, right? We need to schedule this. So what can we do? As I mentioned before, I have a couple of options. So one of the options that I'm going to show you is a Windows task scheduler. I just want to keep it native. I know, like, if it's, I'll be honest with you, if it's at my work, we'll probably use a title agent. You can do a bunch of things there. Plus we use it for many things. But again, now, I'm not going to tell you go and buy another third-party product to do this, right? So this job, if I go and look at the action, all I'm doing is I'm using the PowerShell.exe, and I'm calling that same script that I just ran. But the good part is I can schedule this, right? Whatever time I want, like our SQL Server agent. So let's, before I go and do this, just so you don't feel like, I'm not showing this properly. So if you see this time, it's 3:10. And let's go and run this one more time. So this is also going to run the same script, right? And I have it as an example, run it every day at 11 a.m. and you can do it as many times as you want. Now, I provided a XML version of this task scheduler job. So you probably have to change one or two things, and then you can actually create this job by yourself without making any changes if you're interested. I exported it as XML, and you can import as XML and create a new job. So as you can see that the times change, right? So it came from that schedule, the Windows Task Scheduler. I do not see any question in the chat. I'm monitoring it right now, but if you have anything at this point, please put it in the chat, and we can stop, take a pause, and talk about it. So let's go back to our demo notebook. So the next one is okay, so I already ran this from a different place, so you are aware of that. The Windows Task Scheduler job, I put this here as an XML. Following XML will create the task. You will need to change few values, right? So you can upload this or create it, as I said. So next is the Azure automation. So before I go there, no, let me not do this right now. So I'm going to run this. So what this will do, and Azure automation is a service by itself, just so you know, it's going to create an automation account for us, create a credential that we can, it's a shared resource. We can use it for all our runbook runs, and it will create a blank runbook. So let's kick this off, and then I can talk about this a little bit more by the time it finishes. And once this blank runbook get created, what we're going to do, we're going to replace this code. I put it here. You can copy this, paste this into your runbook, into your demo runbook. So let's refresh this if it get created. And in a runbook, in automation account, there are a bunch of resources that you only have to create once, and you can share, like your connection strings, your credentials, and there are a couple of things that you do not have to create for every runbook, right? You can share those between your runbooks. So now if we go to runbook, we should see one. This is the one got created through that PowerShell code. And if we open this, another good thing is you can pretty much do everything from portal. You can write a runbook, like you can go and edit. As you can see, I'll do this here. So I'm going to remove this. I'll copy paste the code, right? You can test it. You can save it, publish it. Uh, Also, there are galleries that you can import runbook. In fact, just so I be transparent, this one I did not write from scratch. As you can see that I copied it from here, System Center Automation team, right? I copied it and then I edited a few things. Now, if we go to test pan, no, I did not want to go here. So let me go back. Before I do that, I just want to show you a couple of things here. And, you know, I'm showing you a index maintenance if it's fragmented over 20%, and this is just for demo purpose. Please do not quote that, because I showed you that if you have index fragmented 20% or more, you go and rebuild it, right? I'm not advocating that. It's just for demo purpose again. This is where I'm going to check how fragmented a index is, and then I'll go and I'll rebuild those, right? Again, as you can see here, it's a pretty simple. I'm saying alter index all on, and I'm using a variable with the table name rebuild with online on. And again, you can change the threshold, you can do other stuff, replace the code, right? So before we kick this off, let's set up a demo just so we know what we, just to show that it's working. And again, I'm going to do this against Azure SQL server, and I have a database named test runbook. So I'm creating a table. I'm not going to read all this. These are all commented. I'm injecting some fragmentation purposely just for demo purpose. Test runbook. Oh, okay. I have the window hiding, so I was not sure if it's working or not. And let's check the fragmentation. It's 39.8%, right? So based on our 20% threshold, this should trigger this. So if you go to test pane, and once I click start, and just take a note that as soon as I click start, what I was telling you before, it get queued, right? As you can see, it doesn't get run directly, right away. As soon as it has the compute, it grabs the compute and it's ready, it will start running, and you'll see this queued will eventually change to running, and then it will give message to completion. Also, there are now it's running, right? So there was a delay, right? And there are ways to you can have detailed output, and you can go and see what happened if it fails and why it failed and all that. So now, if we run this, as you can see that the fragmentation got to 0% using a runbook. Do runbooks support native T-SQL? No, it does not. As you saw here within my runbook, so the question is, do runbooks support native T-SQL? No, it's a PowerShell or Python, but you can wrap your T-SQL within the PowerShell. That's how you have to do it. That's a question from Monil, that do runbooks support native T-SQL? So there is no concept of a T-SQL runbook as of today. There are two kinds. It's only Python or PowerShell. So you have to wrap your T-SQL within the PowerShell code. So next I'm going to show you Elastic Job Agent. And what I did with this one before all of you came online, I did run up to line 89. And the reason I ran this is pretty much setting up all the security between all these databases. So I didn't want to bore you with running those, but I put enough comment. You should be able to follow this along if you're doing it by yourself. So the first one, I'm creating a target group, right? So anything I do with jobs, like creating jobs, schedule, target group, everything I have to do in the job database. Now, before I do that, let's go down here. These are all the code for the runbook. This is how I enable this service. This is the PowerShell, and I have to give a server name, a database name, and I have to give it a name. So I did not do this. Now, before we do this, if we go to UG demo target server job database, so let me see if I can show you this. Look at this, views, store procs. You do not see anything, right? If you look at this list, there's nothing. Now, if we run this piece of code and then we go back, we'll see a lot of stuff. If you remember, I showed you one of the slides that had, showed you all those store procs views. Those all are going to get created against this database. And again, this database, Microsoft recommend at this point that it should be at least a S1. But again, if you have huge number of Azure SQL databases, and if you think you're going to have a huge number of jobs and how frequently you run, based on those, you should decide, what SQ you are going to use. I already pre-created this and then I'm just using it. So once this is done, we should be able to go to the portal. And we should be able to see a new service here that will get created. Not yet. So sometime I ran this before, but sometime I want to show this. So which is good. It got created. So now we should be able to go and sorry. So we should be able to start, creating some of this stuff. Job server. So we're into the job database and we are creating a target group. I'm not saying what is the target. I'm just creating a target group. Let me take this down a little bit. And now I'm saying this target group, put this server name, right? So every database in this server will be included. And if you want to see the details of a target group, these are some of the T-SQL that you can run. As you can see, it's a group ID, and then it say the target type is a SQL server, and it gives you, all the details. So now I have a target group. Now, some of you might say, master is a system database, right? In Azure SQL Server, I do not want any maintenance again master. I don't need that. It's a waste of my resource. I can always go and exclude a database, right? So I put the code here. You can exclude, you can include, whatever you want to do. So I'm not going to do this, but it's well documented here. So now we have a target group and now I'm creating a job, right? This is just a name and a description. I'm really not adding a job steps. Now I have a job, a target group. Now I have a job steps, and this is the command. So again, don't worry about what it is here. You can replace it with anything you want. I'm just collecting from this DMV because it always collects the metrics every 15 seconds for every Azure SQL database about the resource uses, but it only keeps it for about an hour. So if you have a long running job or if you're troubleshooting, you might want to collect this as at a frequent interval so you can trouble. There is another DMV kind of aggregates this every 15 minutes, but if you need more granular, you can use this. But again, that's not the point. Just showing you, what you can do, or you can replace this with anything else. Now I'm creating a job with a code that what I want the job to do. And I also put bunch of code here that you can see the details of a job, right? Job is steps and whatnot. So if you run this, um, you can see a bunch of things about that job, right? Now I'm starting this job here. Of course, I'm doing this manually, but I can also schedule this. I can also do this with the job ID, just in case. I just put this there. So if you're interested. So now the job is running. Let me hide that window totally. I can see the details about the job execution, what's going on. So as you can see, they run in parallel. They're all in progress, all succeeded. Now, I probably should have mentioned this here. If you see that I have an output database name and I have output table name. So all I'm saying, save this result to the DBA warehouse into this table. So now if we change this to DBA warehouse, because I cannot use a use statement here, right? I told you before. There's the data that we collected. So again, this is a sample. You can replace my code with anything you want. And I'm not going to run the rest. I have a second target group. This time, again, I have a server name. And then, I have the same database size that I was using before. I was collecting that. You can do that. I also have some code in the comment section. Oh no, I have another target as a elastic pool. So if you have a elastic pool, you have 10, 20 databases there, you can target that and your job is going to run against all those. So I also, so this is something useful. You might say, collecting database size, and that is not worth of our time that we are spending with you. So I have something here like return all database that are averaging at least 80% of the CPU. So it's probably time for a scale up if it's consistently using more than 80%. So this is another, piece of T-SQL that you can go and collect that information. So the last one I have left is a Azure function. And we should be done within a few more minutes. So if I go here, I already created a function app and a function, and I put the code here. So this is the exact code I'm going to run. I also, normally I do not try to promote my blog post when I'm giving a talk, but this I spend a lot of time actually to figure out how the managed identity work with Azure function. So I do not have to deal with username, password and all that. And I took help from some of these documentation. So I just put it there in case if you're wondering, because the key to this is this 4 line of code, that you get a token and you use that token for your authentication and for your, for doing the work. So let's go to the portal. Actually, before we do that, I'm going to use the same piece of code here. So I'm going to inject a little bit more of fragmentation and just keep a note. This time it's 98%, right? So now in the portal, I already created this before. So I'm going to go to my function app. And I should probably go to function app service. Okay. So I was talking about managed identity. So if you go here to the identity, if you turn this on, you can have your own, system assigned or your own. What it does actually, it creates a AD object, and then it become like any other AD account that you can bring it to your, you can add in your Azure SQL database, and then give it whatever privilege you need. So that's what I did here. And if we go to, so let's close this, go to overview, and go to functions. So I have a function named index maintenance. This is a time trigger function. So you can have other events trigger your function, right? You can have time-based, you can have other events, you can have webhook and whatnot. So I'm going to go to code test. And I ran this one time before you came, because when you create a function and you run it for the first time, it had to load all the modules and all the dependencies, and it takes some time, and I didn't want everyone to sit there and watch it. Again, this one is, as you see here, the data source is a test run book, a Azure SQL database. And again, I'm saying alter index all on test, rebuild on. So again, I'm not advocating this, but you can replace this command with anything you want to do, right? You want to collect some data, you want to do maintenance, whatever you need to do, you can use this, you can replace it with whatever you need, right? So let's kick this off. And once this is done, we should be able to go back and see that this is to 0, right? So this is another way to do this. So I'm pretty much done with the demo. I'm just going to go back to slide for a minute, and then we'll wrap it up. So I showed you, multiple options, right? I did the same thing many different ways, right? As you saw, like I did the run book and function doing the same thing, collecting database size, using Elastic Job Agent, using link server, using PowerShell, scheduler, right? Um, and again, you can mix and match, right? With like PowerShell, Windows scheduler, third-party scheduler, and then also the language, right? Someone asked if we can do native T-SQL runbook. We cannot. Initially, like 2 years ago, I was not too excited about Azure Function because it did not support PowerShell. Then the PowerShell support came. Then I slowly moved from runbook to Azure Function. Plus, there was some more limitations with the runtime was limited to 10 minutes. Then we could run it for unlimited time with different hosting tier. So you should know your limitations. Also scalability, right? Like as you saw in the Elastic Job agent, I said there's a limit today. You can only run 100 concurrent jobs. And so you need to know that, right? How many you need to run, how many resources you have, and then be flexible, right? Based on your need. I do not have just one solution that's going to fit everyone, right? And because at least that's not what I saw when I was researching this. I also put bunch of resources. So if you want to read more, these are all URLs you can click, and it will take you to. These are all Microsoft documentation. So, and probably there may be video links, one or two. So I'm going to put my contact again in case if you need, and then I can hang out here. Kids are already in bed. It's 10:30, so and we can. I don't know if we prefer you guys can come off mute or put in the chat, whatever we can talk.
Thank you, Taiob. Yes, as mentioned, if you do have any questions that you would like to ask, feel free to come off mute at the moment and you can ask those questions first. To do that, if you want to just raise your hand so that we can have some sort of order and not just have everybody asking their questions at the same time. So yeah, we do have a couple of minutes if people want to still ask some questions.
Or any feedback. I would be, I would love to get, we're not going to pass paper for feedback. So, but anything.
So Taiob, I know this was a question that you asked me and I haven't come around to playing with it as of yet, but have you tried a notebook job in your investigations that you've been doing?
Yeah, so you cannot, I think the question I asked, you cannot run it against Azure SQL database, and as of today, you cannot.
That would be nice if we could.
Yeah, it doesn't let you schedule one against Azure SQL database, and I tried that. Yeah, I had in mind to send you a note, but I thought by that time it's so late, so you probably figured that out, and I didn't want to. Oh, thank you, Ashok. So yeah, thanks for attending. Greg, good to see you here, and your help is always appreciated in the community. Just so you know, I know you know that, but I'm just mentioning it again.
Well, if nobody else has any other questions, feel free to put them through. Just so that everybody does know, next week we have a session on SQL Server Network and Security, and this is being delivered to us by John Martin. So if you're into security from a SQL Server side of things, make sure that you dial in for our session next week. So,
Okay, so share resource. So I can send the link to Warwick also, but if you want to take a note, I'm going to put this in the I'm going to put this in the chat. I refreshed it, as you can see, some of these clips 2 hours ago. So I refreshed the repo because I did change a few things. So you can download it from here right now. I'll also send the link to Warwick if Warwick wants to put it in the meetup or somewhere if anyone needs to. So feel free, download, distribute, play with it, give me feedback. If you see any typo, any mistake, if you get stuck, contact me, whatever works for you.
okay, looks like Anil is typing us a message. So with that, I would like to thank Taiob for his time and thank everybody else for being on the call and being part of today's session, our first session for the month. And we will get this session up on the YouTube channel so that you can come back and watch this fantastic session at any point in time to re-go over what Taiob has taken us through today.
Yeah, so honest question is, Logic App can be useful. So there is a nice documentation that actually shows you the differences between Logic App, Web Jobs, and Azure Functions, right? I'm sure you can do this. I personally see Logic App is more of a orchestrator now. Really, the boundary between Azure Function and Logic App is kind of blurring a little bit, I would say. I'm really not a developer. I'm purely, my 80% of my time is into operations and automating operations. But I haven't used Logic App, but I'm pretty sure, Anil, you can get some of this work done using Logic App. It has over 250 connectors today, I believe, in Logic App. And it's pretty more GUI based, right? So you can drag and drop and connect to stuff. I'm sure it has connectors definitely for Azure SQL database and other things in Azure. So, but I personally did not play with it. I'll be honest with you, but I have seen similar comments before from people. Even web jobs, I don't use it, but I met someone. Um, that gentleman didn't want to use Azure Function. He's fluent into C Sharp, and he does everything via web jobs. I'm like, good for you. Go ahead. Why not, right? The reason that I stopped using Runbook is I think it's a fantastic tool is because I can now do this with function. Elastic Job Agent is very native, like it looks pretty similar, but again, the restriction is I cannot use my PowerShell. That's what I want to use. But if someone is still 100% T-SQL for them, Elastic Job Agent will look and feel pretty much same as on-premise what we are used to. So again, like I said, that's why my end slide, as you saw, like, there's many options, many ways you can do the same thing. uh, just to understand what you need, how much you have to scale, and also look at the cost, right? Because um, the cost adds up, right? We are a small shop. Cost is always a prime concern for us. So
Okay. Well, with that, once again, thank you, everybody. Stay safe, and I look forward to seeing you all online at the next session.
thank you. Thanks all. Bye.